Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? So, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is Nicholas Lopez. I'm Senior Research Director based out of our Toronto office. And welcome to Leger's webinar presenting our latest research on Zillennials. We're going to be discussing their views on employment, finance, the future, and kind of their sources of influence. Zillennials is kind of a moniker we've made up for Generation Z and millennials together. Today, I'm joined by our colleague, Elena Meyer, in the Senior Research Director based out of our Western Canadian division. And for those who haven't heard of Leger before, we're the largest Canadian-owned market research firm with a presence in every part of the country. We have experts in public affairs, consumer insights, healthcare, digital marketing, communications, and branding. So we're really kind of poised to tackle any kind of national issue as well as kind of an issue that pertains to your organization as well. We're going to be walking through kind of 5 key observations from the research study we conducted. The first kind of major finding is around mental health and kind of a discussion around how mental health may be impacting the consumption patterns of Zillennials. Next, we'll be talking about kind of their current financial position and understanding how this economic context is really pressuring and changing kind of the behavioral choices and consumer choices of Zillennials. Elena will be walking us through kind of the employment aspect and understanding how crucial DEI is in kind of that employment decision, as well as kind of a discussion on equity and understanding the differences of opinion from one generation to next, while ending on an overall discussion on how Zillennials define their identity. New for this year, we're also going to be walking through some of our findings from our segmentation study, so be sure to stay tuned until the end. Briefly, just going over kind of what we did, this was a survey among kind of Zillennials, so millennials and Generation Z. But new to this year is also kind of a snapshot on Generation Alpha. Now, we're working with 3 different generational groups here, so I think some age ranges and definitions are in order, but millennials are typically those between the ages of 28 and 43, whereas Generation Z is between 15 and 27, and Generation Alpha is typically defined as those being born after 2010, so in those early 2010s as well. So for this specific study, we only looked at kind of those between the ages of 12 and 14. And kind of throughout the presentation, we have that at symbol, that alpha symbol, that denotes kind of specific data to their generation. We didn't ask all of these questions. We only asked some questions that were relevant to that group. So why don't we go ahead and get started with a discussion on kind of where younger Canadians are at, where Zillennials are at when it comes to their mental health, and whether or not this is impacting their consumption patterns and consumer choices. We've asked this question several years now, just kind of an overall understanding of whether or not kind of younger Canadians have ever experienced major depression, moments of depression or anxiety in their lifetime. And consistent with 2023, significant proportion of Zillennials are reporting that they have experienced a period of anxiety or they have experienced a period of depression. What's interesting is that generational breakdown, Generation Z versus millennials here. There isn't too much of a difference when discussing anxiety, although Generation Z, this is down kind of 6 points from where we were last year. But on that, have you ever experienced kind of a period of depression? We're seeing that millennials are more likely to report having experienced this than Generation Z. We also have some insights on the left side here, kind of providing a quick snapshot on where Generation Alpha is at. So kind of that anxiety piece, 54% indicating that they have, or reporting that they have experienced kind of anxiety at some point in their lives. So, this kind of, really paints a picture of that many are anxious or depressed. But the good news is that these generations are seeking help. Approximately in the last year, 1 in 6 individuals kind of reported taking medication to treat anxiety or depression. This is new to this year for this study, just kind of following up, are you taking kind of any action around this to help with kind of the depression and anxiety that they are reporting. So 17% indicating medication for anxiety, 14% indicating medication for depression. There isn't a huge difference between kind of those generational breaks, Generation Z versus millennials, pretty much in line with each other on taking steps to kind of address some of that mental health concerns that they are reporting. So we kind of know where they are in terms of their mental health, how they're reporting to us in terms of experiencing anxiety and depression. So what does this mean kind of for consumption patterns and kind of the decisions that they're making? You know, this year was very interesting around January. There were a lot more news stories with respect to dry January, Canadians taking up this dry January month where they abstain from consuming alcohol after, you know, the holiday period. Holiday period. Interestingly, we do see that there is a kind of growing segment among kind of that younger cohort, Generation Z specifically, who are reporting that they've never consumed alcohol in comparison to their older millennial counterparts. 22% saying they've never consumed alcohol versus 12% among millennials. And, you know, you look at the rest of kind of this question that we asked about how they kind of consume alcohol over the previous years. 16% indicating that they don't drink alcohol anymore, but have in the past. 29% indicating that they've reduced their alcohol consumption. Millennials kind of remaining the same or increasing kind of their alcohol consumption. But it's really interesting when you think about the context of how kind of consumption patterns are changing. You know, think about, again, that dry January month and having bars and restaurants report, you know, we're kind of empty this month. We're not seeing kind of the volume we've seen in previous years. It must be related to the kind of this increase in kind of that percentage of the population participating in dry January. But I think when you dig under the hood a little bit more and look at kind of the generational differences, you know, some of these behaviors are kind of way out of different kind of from previous generations. Those millennials, you know, having never consumed alcohol, only at 12%, whereas Gen Z almost doubled in terms of the proportion reporting that they've never consumed alcohol. So some of these kind of trends that we're seeing might be trends that might be here to stay, because we're seeing such a change in some of the consumption patterns among those younger cohorts, specifically Generation Z. So if they're not kind of consume, or a percentage are decreasing their kind of alcohol consumption, what are some of the alternatives that they're turning to? We see kind of overwhelmingly on that little chart there on the far right side, folks in Generation Z indicating more so than millennials that they're, you know, consuming kind of products with 0.5% alcohol or less, more likely to be consuming cannabis products, 28% versus 20%, or other drugs in general, 16% versus 9%. So, you know, there is a growing demand among particularly those products, those 0.5% alcohol or alcohol-free products among that younger cohort, which is more likely to not be having ever consumed alcohol or decreasing their alcohol consumption. So right there and then we see kind of this generational divide in how they approach alcohol, how they approach that in their kind of day-to-day lives, and kind of the alternatives that they are turning toward. Part of where kind of these new habits are driven from are kind of like a focus on their well-being. So on the left here, you know, top 5 reasons for having reduced your alcohol consumption or no longer consuming alcohol. 39% reporting physical health, 36% to reduce or eliminate expenses, 33% indicating that they want to improve their quality of life, 29% for their mental health, and 27% for their physical appearance. Among those who have never kind of drank alcohol, they don't like the taste, 45%, 41% for their physical health, 29% highlighting kind of religious reasons, 27% for their mental health, and 26% to feel better about themselves. So we're seeing kind of this shift away from alcohol, and the reasons for it are really focused on kind of that personal well-being, the physical health, the mental health, improving quality of life. So I want to shift a little bit and talk about kind of that financial picture, where kind of younger Canadians, Zillennials, kind of see themselves today and where they want to go in the future. Let's start with kind of looking at the millennial picture here. A majority of millennials kind of aspire to become or are already homeowners or want to get married. You see kind of this doesn't really change from kind of previous generations. They want to own a home. They want to get married. They want to start a family. Significant proportions given where they already are in their life timeline, considering they're older, 28 to 41. They're already kind of homeowners. Strong proportion are already married, over half reporting that they are currently parents. Where the difference comes in is when we look at Generation Z. They are also interested in becoming homeowners, getting married, starting a family. But Generation Z, the key difference is among those who are thinking about starting a family. They're more likely to say no or remain kind of undecided. So there is kind of a gap emerging here on kind of where they see themselves and how they see their future. It's not necessarily the exact same as kind of their older counterparts, the millennial generation. Where the two generations do find some agreement is on the question about whether or not previous generations have had a better chance of financial success. 72% agree that previous generations have been dealt a better hand when it comes to building that financial success piece. So it's really kind of colors the data here in understanding kind of that view and outlook on the economy among younger people and how those major milestones, whether it be homeownership, marriage, starting a family, are starting to differ between those two generations specifically. When we look at kind of what's a little bit behind that number, 72%, I think there are three key data points that really come to light here that Zillennials are reporting to us. The first is 49% indicating that they live paycheck to paycheck, a staggering number. Millennials more likely than Generation Z to report that they are living paycheck to paycheck. Part of this could be an increase in overall expenses as well, thinking about home ownership, thinking about maybe they're already have a family as well. So there are some kind of expenses and economic pressures that are unique to kind of that elder millennial segment. But 49%, almost half, indicating they're living paycheck to paycheck. 47% indicating that sometimes they're dipping into their savings to pay for trips, games, clothes, or kind of whatever leisure product that they're looking to buy. So again, a significant proportion just really, eating into their savings just to kind of do things that they want to do, their hobbies, etc. 19% saying that they don't see the point in saving for the future. I'd rather enjoy my money now. And, about 19, but 20% indicating that, makes sense in the context that 72% are in agreement that previous generations had a better shot at kind of financial success. So, if I'm not going to be able to achieve that, I might as well just live in the moment and spend what I can spend and enjoy kind of life as it is. So where is kind of their money going? And I think this is certainly important to take a deep dive into. 65% kind of indicating that in terms of their monthly budget, 65% of their monthly budget is allocated to essential expenses. So what we mean by this is kind of things like housing, food, transportation, just the basics in kind of your day-to-day life. We see some costs higher among millennials than Generation Z. Again, this makes sense based on where they are currently in their kind of life cycle. So again, could be owning a homeowner at 37%. Most of their money is going to that housing in comparison to Generation Z. But housing is the number one kind of cost. We know this kind of through other data that's out there and reported, giving insight into Canada's kind of overall housing outlook. It's adding an additional kind of pressure to Generation Z and millennials as well in terms of what they're going to spend their money on for themselves in terms of leisure, in terms of reinvesting into kind of the economy writ large. So when 65% of their monthly budget is just going to surviving and the basics of everyday life, it's very hard to think about how your financial future could get better or plan for the future. That's why we're seeing 19% indicating they want to live in the moment, because it's very hard to plan around a future when you can only save only just a little bit from month to month. But I think one of the key things and one of the behavioral forces here as a result of some of these changes is the fact that 9 out of 10 are watching their spending. So we look at kind of that economic pressure again. It's forcing people to take a look at kind of where their money is going. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's sticking to a strict budget. Only 18% indicated to us that they stick to a budget that they follow strictly. 37% saying that they have a budget in mind but don't follow it strictly. 33% indicating that they don't have a budget, but they're watching their spending. And then only really 8%, I don't have a budget and I really am not watching what I'm spending. So I think looking at this, there's kind of a more of a little bit of a magnifying glass on kind of where every kind of dollar is going. That isn't to say that there isn't flexibility. Clearly here, they're reporting that, they're allowing themselves some wiggle room. They're not as strict. There's only a key portion of kind of the sample that is indicating that they are kind of strictly following a budget. So I think, when we look at kind of what this means, this might mean kind of reduction in overall kind of leisure activities, whether that be going out shopping, buy clothes, going to restaurants and bars, kind of those cultural outings. So the movies, theaters, all of this is going to be kind of on the chopping block at the end of the month when somebody's reviewing, a young Canadian's reviewing their overall expenses for the month. Where can I cut back? They're going to be cutting back on some of those kind of extracurricular expenses, things that aren't necessarily tied to their month-to-month living expenses. So I'm going to pass it over to Alana. She's going to be walking us through kind of some insights related to employment.
Thanks, Nicholas. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to start us off with employment, and then I'll go through a couple of new exciting sections that we've added this year. So starting off with employment, let's look at is our generation as woke as, as everyone thinks we are? So first, looking at intention to change jobs. So we've been tracking this over the years. It was higher during the pandemic times around 2021, where we see it at 25% who are looking to change their jobs. And it makes sense given labor shortages, and now it's kind of tapered off over the years with the rise of unemployment rates. So we're seeing it sit at about 1 in 6 who are planning to change their jobs over the next year. Now, this is higher among Gen Z, which makes sense as, they're just starting out. It might be kind of their first or second job, figuring out their careers and, haven't really settled quite yet. Whereas millennials, it's quite a bit lower. Millennials, we've been in our roles for probably 5 to 10 years now, a bit more settled into a career, so making millennials less likely to switch. But overall, it's not surprising to see there is some intention to change jobs, and we think this is going to persist over time. So the average person, they have about 3 to 7 careers in their lifetime, which is huge. And with the younger generations, it's estimated to be closer to 5 to 7. So, we think a constant throughout Zillennials' careers is that change will always be there. And when it comes to, retaining Zillennials and what they care about, we know from our other studies that work-life balance is so critical to this generation, and also opportunities for advancement. So things that organizations and companies really need to be offering to attract and retain the best talent. And one more thing I will mention on this that we found interesting is that intention to change jobs is higher in the private sector than in the public sector. So for private companies or private sector companies, especially important to think about, how can you provide that work-life balance for this generation? How can you be competitive with your compensation? And how can you provide a clear direction for career growth and advancement opportunities? So definitely a lot to think about when it comes to Zillennials and how they think about work in their career. And next, getting to the interesting stuff. So we wanted to understand how important is diversity, equity, and inclusion when it comes to choosing an employer? And are we, as quote unquote woke as everyone thinks we are? And what's interesting is that we saw there's only kind of a moderate level of importance that's placed on DEI when looking for an employer. So this is, although higher among those who are intending to leave their job. So it is a bit more top of mind, but for the rest, it's a little bit more on the back burner. It could be that nowadays it's more of just the general expectation, that companies do have, DEI policies, that they value it. It's just kind of the baseline that is offered. Um, but the biggest takeaway here is that, it's kind of moderate importance. There's other things that might rise to the top that take precedence in terms of, compensation, work-life balance, those things that will always be really important. But it was interesting to learn this year that DEI isn't necessarily the main focus for Zillennials, which gets even more interesting when we understand how familiar Zillennials are with the concept of DEI. And while, there are a portion who know what it is, they have a good understanding of it, we found it very surprising to see that 1 in 5 have never actually heard of the concept of DEI. So while we might think that, all Gen Z millennials are up to date on this, they're paying attention to this, they care about it, there is a portion who don't. They don't even know what it is. So, there's definitely a group that is more disconnected, and we can't really think about Gen Z and millennials all as the same. There's so many nuances and diversity within them. And I think this demonstrates that well. So next we are going to look at equity. This is an exciting new section we added this year based on what's trending in the media, what people are talking about. We really wanted to understand this with some data to see what is truly happening with these generations. And especially with the rise of, trends on social media like trad wives and, changing those kind of views of gender, we wanted to understand what are people thinking about equity these days. So first, we're looking at some perspectives towards equity from a few different aspects and different groups. So looking at gender, visible minorities, the 2S LGBTQ plus community. And overall, what we're seeing is that Zillennials feel there's still a lot of progress to be made on equity. There's especially significant concern on the restrictions on women's reproductive rights, and not only in the US, but also in Canada and the rest of the world. And on the right-hand side of the slide here in the green, you'll see it's much higher among women. So women are really concerned about this. And to further kind of the point of gender equity, we're seeing that overall only 30% feel that equality between men and women has been achieved in Canada, which is actually quite low given, the progress we've made to date. There's still that feeling, there's a lot more to do. So really important for organizations and businesses to look at, how can they help move towards equity, not only for gender, but for all different groups, and kind of what role that they can play in terms of hiring practices, what you're putting out in terms of messaging and really that overall role. Moving on to look at more gender-related perspectives, we're really seeing that there's a perception that there are still gender pressures that still are persisting today. Women especially feel this. So again, despite the progress we've made, there's still a feeling of we need to do more, especially when it comes to women being judged on their physical appearance. A lot agree, 73%, that women are being judged more on their physical appearance than men. Women especially feel this way. No surprise given what we see in social media. Everything has a filter on it. The photos are edited. We're seeing these perfect, gorgeous women, and it's having an impact on us. And then also we're seeing there's a lot of concern around gender stereotypes that are persisting in our society, especially among women. So, while there's been progress made, there's still room to go. And it's important more than ever for companies to think about, what you're putting out in the world, in the media, and is it kind of helping or hindering gender equity and the feelings that Zillennials are having towards it. So this is another new section we've added this year that we're excited to share with you. It is on identity and sources of influence. With so much talk about how we identify our identities, we wanted to see if this generation cares about it as much as we might think, and kind of what factors go into that. So we'll look at both sources of influence and identity in this next section. So first, looking at more sources of influence and political and social concerns. What we're seeing overall is that there is a level of concern around polarized political views, especially the rise of right-wing ideas, not only in the US, again, also in Canada and the rest of the world. And there's also some level of feeling that right-wing ideas are being misrepresented or distorted by the media, although a bit smaller. But what's really interesting here is that we're seeing a significant portion, at least 1 in 5, who don't have an opinion on current affairs. So this is telling us that there is a group who just aren't very informed. They don't know what's going on in the world from a political and social standpoint. And it's a good amount. So it could be that the Online News Act, which came into effect late 2023, could be driving this. Now that social media platforms, you can't share news like you used to. Millennials and Gen Z aren't getting it to the extent that they may have previously. From our digital study, we know that this generation really does get its information from social media. We rely on it heavily. So if the news and current events aren't there's a gap. Not everyone is getting this information. So really important for the future to think about how can we fill this gap. We know that Gen Z and millennials and Gen Alpha will be the ones kind of shaping our future. So really important that we're informed and we know what's going on in the world. All right, next, looking at social media and kind of the influence and risks of that. Overall, what we're seeing is that, Gen Z, millennials, and Alpha too, we know the risks of social media. We know it can be bad, but we still use it. So there's a good understanding that algorithms are influencing what we see. They're kind of driving what's coming up on our main feeds. We also understand that can kind of lead to biased content, kind of leaning towards a specific viewpoint, and also just generally misleading content. So, we're aware, it's not deterring us yet from using social media. There's still, that heavy reliance on it. And even with Gen Alpha, despite how young they are, they're just as aware of these issues as Gen Z and millennials. So we can bust the myth that, we're not informed of this. We know, we're just deciding to still use social media. All right, moving on here to identity. So again, something new that we added this year, we wanted to understand how do younger generations identify, what importance does it play? And overall, what we're seeing is that, we don't all identify in the same way, and we don't actually all place the same importance on it. So there's really some key differences and a wide range of factors that contribute to how we might identify ourselves. So the top ones we're seeing are, cultural background, gender, nationality, language. Those are all quite important. But when we compare Gen Z and millennials is where we start to see some differences. So overall millennials, if you look at the bottom of the slide, they just don't say their identity is as important. So might be speaking to a bit more traditional views on this. Whereas Gen Z do place more value on defining their identity. Gender is especially important for Gen Z over how millennials value it, and also religion, which is interesting, given kind of the overall decline in society that we're seeing of religion. It's surprising to see that millennials do place some importance on this, although Gen Z does, but given Gen Z is a lot younger, they're likely still a lot more influenced by their parents and still holding a lot of the same religious views as their parents. Whereas, as we get older, we start to kind of shift away from those or form our own opinions. So we think that's kind of what is driving that difference there. But overall, the biggest takeaway is that we do have very diverse ways of identifying and a different level of value on identity. Okay. So lastly, we want to share something new we added this year, which is a segmentation on Zillennials. So we can't just use demographics anymore to profile Zillennials. So things like age, gender, income, we really need those attitudes and values to help understand what kind of groups exist within this overall generation, because we do know there's a lot of diversity within it. So as you may know, the purpose of a segmentation is to create profiles of consumer groups that help businesses, help marketers kind of tailor their strategies and messaging to specific groups. So this is a new feature that's available for purchase this year. And over the next section, we'll just show you a bit of a sneak peek on what you would get with the report. So looking at a snapshot of the 5 key segments, there's 5 distinct segments. They're all nuanced and quite unique in their values and attitudes. And as you can see, they're different sizes of the market. So we have our bigger segments, the traditionals and the anxious, and some smaller ones as well. So the size does vary. And as you can see, there's things that make each one of them unique. So for example, the optimists, they're a lot more open to change, about changing the tradition and blazing their own trail. Whereas on the other hand, we have our traditionalists who are much more traditional, maybe a bit less interested in things like climate change and gender issues, and more interested in things like education, AI, the economy. So a lot of diversity between these segments. And on this next slide here, we'll give you a bit more of a sense of what you will get if you do purchase the report. So it is a comprehensive report that goes into each segment in detail. So in terms of their demographics, attitudes, outlooks on life, other topics, really helps go away from a one-size-fits-all approach and helps you add a layer of nuance and precision to your strategy. A nice aspect we're offering in this package is the typing tool for the segmentation. So a typing tool is a series of questions that you get that you can put into new surveys that will group your audience into these exact segments. So you can continue to use these segments as part of an ongoing strategy and conduct further research on them, and even ask questions that might be more specific to your business or industry. So a nice feature there. And we'll just give you a little bit more of a sense of, this is just at a glance, some of the content in the report covers a wide range of topics, but of course the report goes into much more detail. But just to give you a quick look. So moving on here. So overall, just in summary, we do have the full free report for you on Zillennials. That will be on our website, and you'll get a link by email along with the recording of the webinar. And then there's also the Zillennial report for purchase. So if you're interested in this, please contact our client solutions team. We have the email for that on the following slide here. But overall, wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to tune in and learn all about Zillennials. We're really happy to share all of this with you. and we wanted to open the floor for any comments or questions that you might have.
Okay, thanks, Alana. I'm just going to take a look to see what kind of questions we do have so far. And we got a couple of questions coming in on specifically on alcohol, just the idea that, because they're younger, they're probably not having the same kind of opportunities to consume alcohol. Certainly, that would be the case in terms of the overall kind of life cycle position that they might be into. But I would say that, there is a growing kind of mound of data, evidence worldwide of kind of the younger generations pulling back a little bit on alcohol. One of those key studies is one conducted by actually the NHS in the UK in 2019 that really showed that 16 to 25-year-olds are way more likely to have not drank at all or have drank and pulled back significantly on how much alcohol they are consuming in comparison to older generations, not just millennials, but Gen X and baby boomers as well. So there's certainly kind of a trend that needs to be continued to be monitored on how kind of this uptake might continue to grow, or the pullback rather on alcohol may continue to grow among that Generation Z cohort, and with specific focus on kind of, if not alcohol, then what? Where are they going to? Are they kind of engaging more in kind of those non-alcoholic options that are out there, or other substances such as cannabis as well?
All right, so we have another question here that the questions are, where did we go? So that there's a focus heavily on topics affecting women, and if we've considered exploring social pressures and issues that disproportionately affect men. Absolutely. So in this presentation we put together, this is just a snapshot of some of the questions that we asked. We wanted to include ones that had some really strong views, but in the full report, you'll see that there's a lot more topics covered. So we definitely recommend that you check that out as well.
Just a question on terms of how the research was done. This was an online survey through our Leger Opinion Panel. Leger Opinion Panel is one of the most robust kind of panels out there on the market. We have access to over 400,000 Canadians who are members of our panel. So we were able to send this survey out to kind of our panelist members on the Leger Opinion Panel who completed that poll, this poll specifically online. Okay, and I see another question here about spending, specifically that 50% or so that are reporting kind of living paycheck to paycheck. So the question is, what is your speculation on the likelihood that these generations kind of will ramp up their tendency to give money to major charities? What's interesting is that there is data out there that kind of suggests that, because of, how online kind of the younger generations are, there is a little bit more of a propensity to give. And I think this kind of challenges the notion that, there's this kind of slacktivist generation that isn't necessarily, they'll post something online and kind of that's about it. They are kind of engaging in charitable giving. I think the caution here is that, as your costs and everyday expenses live, there's less and less money left over at the end of the month to be able to do things you want to do, whether that's a hobby or leisure, or in the case of charitable giving, give some money to a charitable cause that you may support. So I think certainly it is a concern given the economic context that young people are living in, and certainly one that charities are going to have to keep an eye on and determine, what are some other ways that we can reach kind of those younger generations to get them engaged in our mission, and then convert them over to being kind of a financial donor or supporter of the organization.
All right, we have another one here. Do you think that the economic environment and the fact that more people live paycheck to paycheck and watch their spending, that they're less likely to be attracted or influenced by communications regarding products and services? That is a great question. So we do know that for a lot of Gen Z and millennials, money is tight and there isn't that level of discretionary income that other generations may have. Although we do know this generation can still be heavily influenced, and while it might not be a big ticket item, I think our generations are looking for little ways to, bring moments of joy, whether it's a little treat here and there or treating yourselves. And especially on social media, there's so much sponsored content, so many creators kind of pushing products, and we do see that that works. So overall, even though money is tight, we do think that there is that level of influence, and that this generation is still making purchases.
Great. Just looking through some of these other questions here.
There's one, does hopelessness fuel the attitudes towards finance, and how does this change across the segments? We are seeing with the segments that one of the biggest differentiators is that outlook towards the future and how positive or not it is. So there's some segments that just feel disillusioned. They feel hopeless. I'm never going to be able to buy a house. I'm never going to be able to be financially stable, whereas other segments feel completely different. So that's definitely a big differentiator among the segments, and those views on finances and kind of hopefulness for the future really do range depending on who you're talking to.
Okay, just taking a look. Just one comment here that I think it's important to kind of just circle back to on that charitable giving piece. Given the fact that we are seeing a lot more of that economic pressure on younger generations, which might impact their ability to kind of donate financially to charitable organizations, you might be seeing kind of a shift in how they engage. So, for example, volunteering for an event or volunteering to assist the charitable organization in its mission might be something else that younger folks are looking to give to, still being involved in some way via their time. So the key will really be trying to convert those kind of volunteers to kind of those financial donors if they are coming in the organization, supporting an organization via kind of that volunteering pipeline.
See another question here. Will the report include a comprehensive snapshot of each of these generations? So that will be in the segmentation report that's available for purchase, but the free report will not include that.
And just to clarify that Generation Alpha piece, so we went out to 200 respondents in the data set. So these are 200 folks that we interviewed who are part of that Generation Alpha, so that 12 to 14 age range. So when we're seeing that throughout the report, that alpha symbol, it's specifically data for those kind of respondents. Okay. Just looking through other questions here. Okay, well, let me just wrap up here. Okay. Well, I think we've got through most of the questions here. Certainly, if you have any additional questions or comments, we've put that email to our client solutions team, solutions@leger360.com, where you can kind of learn a little bit more about the overall kind of report, as well as kind of the segmentation available for purchase as well, and the comprehensive study available for purchase as well. Very affordable in terms of being able to understand kind of these important demographic groups. Well, thank you everybody for taking some time out of your day to join us. And again, any additional comments can be emailed to solutions@leger360.com, and you will receive a recording of the webinar and the full free report. We do have kind of a more comprehensive report available for purchase, as well as kind of the segmentation tool as well. So thank you everybody for taking some time to join us today.
Thanks everyone.